All right, so welcome everyone back to our Bible study. Ooh, goodness, if I can keep my camera straight, that'd be great. So let's do a little recap from last time and then we'll jump in for today's. Ooh. So we're discussing chapter 15 today, and just 15 because I do want to dig down deep into what it means to covenant, because this is the first time the word covenant itself is popping up. But if you remember what we were talking about last time, we had this big episode, or we spent 2 chapters discussing a episode with Lot, where Abram and Lot decided that their parties were so big they should split, and they did. And Lot chose kind of the Sodom and Gomorrah area, but then there was some war in the area and Abram had to go to the rescue, and evidently is this military genius that got all the stuff back and saved Lot. And so now we're back. Lot has been rescued. Abram didn't accept the extra prize money because he's like, yeah, God's going to make me rich on his own, so I don't need your extra stuff. Does that sum up what you all remember last time?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's jump forward, going from those episodes to now God and Abram kind of hashing it out together. So this is chapter 15 is kind of one conversation, and it brings up some of the things we've already seen a few times, but I'm curious what sticks out about this section before we run through it and get into the nuts and the bolts. What are some of the initial thoughts you all have about what covenant looks like in this chunk?
Well, it doesn't use the word covenant, but it makes promises to Abraham. I don't see the word covenant. I see the covenant is used with the circumcision.
Okay.
Is the word covenant in this chapter?
Well, the title, at least in my Bible, where it gives titles, it says God's covenant with Abram.
Okay.
As the heading to chapter 15.
I keep looking for him really following through. He keeps saying, I don't have any descendants. And God says, oh, we're going to take care of that. And then he doesn't.
Okay, so let's start there. So yeah, there's kind of a promise that keeps getting made. And as you kind of say, this has already been brought up a time or two. And God's just promising, and then nothing happens for a while.
Yeah.
Just for following along, I have the word covenant used in 15 verse 18. I don't know that. Don't.
Oh yeah. On that day, the Lord made a covenant. Sorry.
Okay.
So,
now
to your descendants, I give this land from the river of Egypt. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Larry, what's up?
Okay, there's one thing there, a phrase that I wasn't certain I understood, and that's in verse 6. And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. Now, what does that phrase mean? Reckoned it to him as righteousness. That doesn't compute exactly to me, other than it sounds like maybe he's reaffirming it or saying this is God saying this is the way it's going to be, or I don't know.
Any thoughts before I jump in on what that might entail?
Well, it sounds like he's telling him you don't have to worry about that. I don't know about that word reckoned, but I suppose it means explain to him, and it's a good thing. He's going to have a lot of offspring, and that's kind of what it says to me.
Well, it also sounds like that the fact that Abram believes the Lord and sees him as all powerful, that's a righteous thing to do. I mean, that makes him a good man.
Hello.
Yeah, Mary Ellen?
when I'm looking at 6, I kind of rephrase it as, and he believed the Lord, and the Lord accepted it as righteousness. Would
Oh, okay.
be the way that I would do that.
Right.
Mhm.
Ah,
Yeah.
but it's the Lord that's doing the reckoning.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
He's the
Yeah.
active one.
Right. The other word I might put in there is like attributed. Like it was like put as a credit on Abram's account as like +1 righteousness, that it's because he believed it was kind of this like, you are righteous. This is put on your account in kind of a, if that makes anything. It was attributed to him. It kind of put on the ledger, recorded, God recorded that Abram was righteous. It kind of, I think it helps in this one if you think about it more as like, so the thing, backing up a step, the thing to note, as we've been kind of pointing out on and off, is what word is used for God here. And we have the Lord in the small caps, meaning that this is the Yahweh version. This is a Yahweh story, which if we think back as to the other times we've seen kind of the Yahweh version of God, it's more of temporally bound. So not a God that is all-knowing, the kind of deity in the sky, but the more the deity on earth that like walks around, which is very helpful to know overall in this story, that this is kind of more of the boots on the ground kind of spirit in time and place. So using this phrase, reckon to him as righteousness, is kind of implies that God didn't fully know that Abram was righteous, but like learned it in his response. And it's that kind of temporally bound, it was reckoned to him. If I was to like reckon to Helen that she is a courageous person, it's like, oh, I see you're courageous. I'm gonna like now update my like mental image to say like you're courageous. And so does it help to kind of put that more in like a
Okay.
temporally
Gotcha.
bound idea?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, other observations before we walk through it?
The other part about how do I know that I'm going to possess this land? And he talks about, you know, the animals, the female goat and the ram and the turtle dove and the pigeon. That is kind of weird.
It is.
Yeah, and this is supposed to prove that they're going to end up in the promised land. I don't see the reasoning there. Well, of course, there's not a lot of reason for it, lots of stuff, but
Yep. So let's talk about it. So
yeah,
if that's I'm gonna put a pin in that one so we can get there, but we will talk about it, because
Okay.
yeah, that whole scenario is really strange, right?
yeah.
All right.
Especially because it isn't clear what it accomplishes, except he falls asleep and he wakes up knowing for certain. I mean, it's like magical thinking or something. I don't know.
Okay. Yep. So let's jump into verse 1 here and kind of, we'll see what we can puzzle out together, and we're going to make this story make more sense, because trust me, it does make more sense when you get into it. So we have the kind of after these things. That is one of your trademark time has passed. That is just a transitional phrase that kind of gets you from one story to the next. So the Lord comes to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram, I am your shield and your reward will be great. So any initial thoughts about kind of God just like after this, I mean, the transition from like this battle scene where Abram had kind of this heroic fight scene, and then God kind of just showing up and saying, I'm going to be your shield and reward great. How's that kind of as like an introduction? Yeah, Mary Ellen.
I find the use of shield very interesting because a shield is used for protection. And, so I see this as God telling Abram, I will protect you. And your reward shall be very great. But I like the use of the word shield.
Mhm.
So that begs to question, what situations are shields used in? Like, yes, it's protective. Protective in what situations?
Or it could be
Wars.
wars, enemies.
Well, it
People
sounds like
preach and
war.
fight.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But we talk about parents shielding their children from harm. So, but that may be a modern use of the word, because a shield is something you hold up when you're going into battle. I don't know if they did in those days.
Yeah. I mean, to be in a situation where you need a shield, you have to go out, right?
Mhm.
The shield isn't something you use at home.
Mm-mm.
Mm.
Well,
Well, is
unless
God,
somebody comes after you.
Okay.
but is God using this as a more broader meaning? Could that be? I mean, rather than war?
Okay, say more. What you thinking?
Well, it could be that he's facing challenges in the future of some type. And right away, he's afraid he's not going to have any children. But the Lord has already promised that he's going to take care of him and shield him in some way. We don't know yet. And from this part, what he's going to be shielded from. But it could be
No.
people, ideas. It could be a lot of things.
Another flood.
Yeah. Although God promised no more floods.
Mhm.
Let's see.
So I want to connect this to the first time God and Abram talked. Because as we've seen, this isn't the first time they've had conversations, right?
Mhm.
So Abram's original call is back over in chapter 12 at the beginning there. So if you put your thumb here and flip over, we see the first conversation that is at least recorded. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house into the land that I would show you.
Mhm.
So this is kind of like there's a sending there. And so at this point, like Abram's been sent, he's gone farther and now kind of come back to this area. And now we have this promise of, I'm going to be your shield. Does that change? Or so how does that kind of context of knowing that like Abram's been pushed out of the nest, as we've kind of been talking about, he's been pushed into new social networks, new business adventures. And now we have kind of this, I'm going to be your shield. What kind of images does it draw up in that context?
Well, travel is certainly in his future, and there's a lot of challenges as he travels. I suppose when he comes to these things that happen, God's going to take care of him, shield him from whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, but he already got through, they had that big war amongst the 5 kings, you know. He got through that. He went in and rescued Lot. He got through that. He hasn't had any big setbacks at all. It doesn't
He goes
sound.
into Egypt.
Between the 2 conversations, you know, things, it's been busy, but he's come out on top each time.
But he's still worried about not having any children.
Yeah, well, he's worried about the future.
No, he is beyond the normal age of child rearing, so I can understand why it's on his mind. God keeps promising this, but you know,
He
do we-
gives, in order to live in, he gives Pharaoh his wife, who was pretending to be his sister, for his harem. I mean, it's kind of weird, but we've talked about that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, so yeah, it's interesting. Abram gets back from this battle and where he was successful and he was good, and God comes and says, okay, I'll be your shield, which almost feels like, hey, buddy, I'm okay with that. What about my kids? Like, thank you very much for being my shield. I've done what you've said. I've been successful so far. How about keeping up the other end of the promise here?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm curious about this shield because part of my brain went down the route of, well, does that mean after this battle, maybe Abram's tired and he's like not going to want to move anymore, and God's like worried that he's going to like stay where he is and not move when God still needs him to be like out in the world moving and doing things? But it sounds like that's not the thing that's on Abram's mind, certainly. We see immediately, I know the tone that I hear in my head of God giving, once again, what seems like a gracious thing, like, I will be your shield, your reward. I'm like blessings on blessings. And Abram comes back immediately like, come on, what are you getting me? And like being bold with God, being upfront and stating needs. Like, did you all get that tone of voice here too?
Yeah,
Of
well,
like,
yeah, a little bit. Yeah, he's worried about it.
mhm.
He doesn't know how that's going to happen.
Well, and this is the J version, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a more of that, like walking in the garden with Adam, kind of God. And he's hard to pin down, isn't he?
Mhm. Yeah.
You promised, and you didn't give.
Right. So I was looking in the notes, and the when it says the heir of my house will be Eliezer of Damascus. Evidently, the notes say this is the only time this name is given. But the thing that I think is important here is Damascus, which is a location where they're not currently. So it's like, is my heir of all of this stuff gonna be some dude in another place? Is it gonna be a servant? Which is interesting because Lot's now back with the thing, and I was trying to read up, and I have no idea what happened to like maybe Lot inheriting things. It seems like he's now out of the picture for now. So what do you all, I mean, this kind of concern of like passing things down, of having a legacy. The thing to note about why this might be more important than in this context is, at this point in the Jewish worldview, there is no concept of an afterlife. When you're dead, you're dead. God's blessings are for this life, and what you want for a good life is a long life and lots of kids to carry on your memory. And so it's not like there's a promise after Abram dies that there's going to be something else. At this point, that actually just doesn't exist in the worldview. That's considered more like an Egyptian thing, and the Egyptians got all the afterlife thing covered, but that's not here. So there is this major concern with having someone to pass Abram's massive amount of wealth to. How do you all relate to this, or is it relatable? What are our anxieties of like, if they're not just like, I don't have kids? Well, how do you relate to this, and what do we worry about? What's the difference here?
Well, people have different feelings about not having kids, I think.
Mhm.
I was unable to have my own child, and I never thought, never occurred to me that I didn't have a legacy, or
Mhm.
that wasn't the issue. I always wanted to be normal.
Mm,
I wanted to be normal and like everybody else. And but I can see that now. That it might,
mhm.
but I think it's more the male heir that's important to some people.
Okay, yeah. Larry, what's up?
You know, I would think currently, as people age, they worry if they have children. If they
Yes.
have children, then they're worried about what they're leaving and how's it going to be divided. And so if they don't have any kids, you know, they'll give it to some charity or something or other. So the anxiety is not wanting to have a lot of kids so you can divide your pot up into many, many pieces. It's more, well, if that's what you got is a bunch of kids, then you divide it up. If you don't have any, you decide to do something else. So it's a different, it's a different mindset about things. Abram's worried about what's going to happen to his stuff, you know? He wants it divided up amongst his people. That's why he wants all these kids.
Yeah, and besides, our kids nowadays don't want our stuff.
No.
So,
Money, please, but no stuff.
Yeah.
but this brings up the fundamental question of, we don't look at kids like our children the same way, right?
No.
Correct.
So what's different about how we look? Because fundamentally, I feel like the core issue here is Abram looking to the future. In what ways does our looking to the future, what does that look like? Whether you have your own children or not, because there's many people who were never able to have children for various reasons, and there's many people who don't want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So what does our kind of how do we think about what we're leaving when we're gone? What does that look like today? So you all made the comments like, well, they don't want our stuff specifically. They don't want my chairs or my dining room table.
That's
They
right.
don't want my trinkets. They don't necessarily want the pictures on my walls. And then, but also for those who don't have necessarily a like direct child, but even for like family and friends, what do we think about passing on? What is our concern overall? Yeah, Helen, just note you're on mute.
I had a noise going on here. I think some of us, or many of us, think about the world situation, such as climate change and what's happening with the government and what's happening with world things. I know that I'm more concerned about those things than what I leave to my children as far as my personal wealth is concerned. I figure once I'm dead, I don't have any influence over that. But right now, maybe I have a little influence over, not much, but a little, over what the world is like and what they will be living in.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that may be somewhat similar because what Abram is concerned about is power. After all, he's the leader. And so he's concerned, maybe about monetary, sort of how many goats each kid's going to get and so forth. But the main thing he's concerned about is the legacy of power and governance and how's that going to be carried on after he's gone. In the same way, I'm not worried about any power I'm leaving, but you can be concerned about social issues, as Helen said, about climate change and other things. That can be more the legacy that you're concerned about.
Yeah. So Larry, what you bring to mind is the fact that, I mean, as we've brought up a few times, this hasn't occurred to me before, so bear with me as I'm sorting this out. Because Abram has, as we've discussed, like a small village with him.
Mhm.
He also has the livelihood and the well-being of everyone under him.
Mhm.
That, yes, he kind of doesn't want it to shift to someone else. He does want someone in the family, but in the end, he wants to train up someone who is able to care for people,
Mhm.
that isn't going to let people starve, that like if there isn't a clear like transition of power in a way, there might be jockeying for power, which means there might be clashes, which means the group might be split apart, which means some people may get like, or may fall through the cracks. And like, you don't want that, like, if you are really concerned about the well-being of the thing, you don't want people to fall into poverty because they can't figure out who is supposed to lead the group, which is, I think, maybe not dissimilar to like the power jockeying that's going on in our country, that like we don't want to be split apart, because when there is strife, the people without power suffer the worst. Yeah, Mary Ellen?
I'm listening, processing, whatever, but what's falling into place for me is Abram has this enormous power base of people, of warriors, of people to care for his livestock, all of the women and children that are part of this enormous responsibility. And he is saying to God that I continue childless, and the heir to all of this is a slave, a city boy. Damascus is a city. And so there's no background, there's no understanding of how to continue what Abram and God have created. We haven't gone into why this slave and whatever, but I'm seeing Abram's dilemma of, this is a city boy and he's a slave. How are all of these people going to accept him, first of all, if he is my heir? And how can a slave be accepted and trusted and be acknowledged by the people? This is our new leader. How can you, talking to God, how can you leave me like this? I've created all of this and we've done this together, and you're going to have a city boy, as my heir. So that's kind of where my brain is going.
Yeah, almost what I'm hearing is like, I need time to train someone to take my place.
My heir needs to have already been functioning as, a member of this community and understand how to keep it a healthy, wealthy community.
So I'm going to take a jump and connect it kind of to some of our modern church context, because this is something we're seeing, is there is a lot of anxiety of people being like, we have cultivated these wonderful congregations, these wonderful communities, and we're seeing a gap in leadership. Like, we want to keep training people, so like we don't get to a spot where if the people who know how to do the business of the church suddenly pass away or aren't able to do their jobs, we don't want there to be a gap. We don't want there to, like, all of this like institutional knowledge is valuable, but we're not seeing people younger than us step up. What's going on?
Yeah. So do we discuss this slave and how he became Abram's heir, or is?
I will be honest, I don't know. This is the if you have a kind of a mental image, that would be helpful. But literally, what my Bible here says in the notes is Eliezer of Damascus is not mentioned elsewhere, although an unnamed slave appears or an unnamed servant of Abram plays a major role in chapter 24, verse 3, and appears to be some explication of obscure terms in verse 2 of air. So we don't really know much about this guy. It just, like I said, it feels like Lot should be in the air, but he's somehow not.
You
Well,
mean
my-
Hagar son?
Guess would be that this is his child by a slave, or, I mean, it was very common in those times that a man in his position would also be having sex with the slaves and whatever, and have offspring that way. That was my
I will say
supposition.
that's likely not the case, only because it becomes the case in a little bit. So
Okay.
there's an explicit story about exactly that happening. And because that's such a big deal and causes problems in a little bit, I'm going to assume that this guy's not.
Okay.
So that's just an assumption reading between the lines. Because, I mean, Sue, you mentioned there's Hagar and Ishmael, which is that whole situation of, because he starts to get worried, they go that route, and there's a lot of dynamics there that goes on. So probably not, but I can't also guarantee that because we just don't really know much about this guy.
Probably not what?
The Eliezer, no, that's Eliezer. Eliezer of Damascus likely is not Abram's son by like a servant.
Oh,
Okay.
So good thinking, because that very much comes into play, just not yet. So at the end, though, the word of the Lord comes to him and assures Abram that, like, no, your whole, or all of this is not going to go to a servant. It's not going to go to a slave. You're going to have your very own heir. Don't worry. Which it seems a little bit more palatable rather than Abram kind of being seen as like, oh, I'm this rich guy, I wanted to go to my kids, rather than I need someone that knows what they're doing because there's a lot of people relying on me. Seems a little bit more reasonable in my mind. Anyways, so God assures him that, like, no, we're going to do this the right way, brings him out to look at the stars in the sky and says, can you count them? So shall your descendants be. And then we get into this wait, where are we? There we go. So we kind of get a little bit of recounting of the history of what God's already done. I, the Lord, brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land that you possess. And then we have this question of, like, how do I know? How do I know that you're going to do what you say you're going to do? And here comes to the weird part with the animals. So what we have is a heifer of 3 years old, a female goat of 3 years old, a ram of 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. We're going to cut them all in half, line them up in a row, but make like a walkway in between. And wait.
Where'd the walkway come from?
Wait. Hold
he
on.
cut them in two.
Line each half over against the other. Oh, hold on here. But he did not cut the birds in two. Okay. So he's like cutting them and like lining them up, it sounds like. Or at least that's always how I've heard it explained. Like, we're going to cut them in half and we're going to put them like this with the birds here. So kind of a weird mental image, right?
Mhm.
Put a pin in it. We're going to go through the dream sequence and come back to it. Sounds good?
Okay.
All right. So the sun is going down. After Abram cuts these animals up and lines them up, he falls into a deep sleep, and he's terrified because there's a bunch of darkness that comes down. And then we have this kind of dream world speech of God. Know for certain that your offspring will be aliens in a land that is not theirs. They shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment to the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generations, from iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So what is going on there? What's your all's, and do you have any idea what's being talked about at all?
Sounds like they're going through a horrible time, but it'll come out on top.
Okay. Larry, check your mute.
I've got a crying baby in the background. So, is that a forecasting? The Israelites are going to be imprisoned in Egypt. They're going to be there for a significant period of time. Then they're going to get out. And he said, one of the problems, this problem with the Amorites, I sort of gathered that's because they're descendants on Lot's side, and they still haven't been taken care of yet. I mean, he says their iniquity, which means their bad behavior, hasn't been fully taken care of yet. So we got to wait till that gets over before some of this other stuff can start unwinding.
If I believe correctly, just for a quick clarification, I don't have the official verse number. I believe the Amorites are technically in the list of if you remember the genealogies we went through, and we talked about the righteous genealogies and the here is all the bad people genealogy. I believe the Amorites are in the lineage of Cain or the lineage of Noah's bad son. So they're in that list of bad people.
Yeah, they're on the bad side of things.
Yeah.
Not the good side.
Right.
Okay.
All right, Mary Ellen, go. What's up?
What strikes me here also is that up until now, God has been the giver of good news to Abram. All these wonderful things have come. I will be your shield. I will protect you. I will be there for you in all circumstances, and I will give you this vast land that will be yours alone. And then this dream comes, and God comes to him, and boy, there certainly isn't much positive in this, that how long his ancestors will have to wait, and the iniquities that will come their way. I mean, this is really, to me, doom and gloom, other than the fact there will be descendants. So I see this as a huge contrast in what God has been telling him all along.
So let me dig a little bit in that observation. So we mentioned at the beginning that God's been promising. It's showering kind of Abram with all these affirmations of you're going to be rich, you're going to be protected, all of these things, and you're going to have lots of kids. And Abram's yeah, but when are you going to pay up? Mm-hmm. Abram still has a while to wait before God's going to give him a descendant. Mm-hmm. Does the promise of not just descendants, but strife after descendants, does that actually build confidence, or does that just make you feel oh my gosh, why am I wanting this now? How does that change the seriousness versus the trust? Do you trust someone more if they are able to shower you with good things, but also tell you the hard things that are coming, or is that just discouraging?
Well, it's the truth. And don't you want to, I mean, I like to hear the truth, and so I can prepare for it. And things aren't always just perfect and wonderful. We do have challenges, and he's telling him that, you know, this is, you're going to have descendants, but there's a lot of trouble coming.
And
You have to live through it.
I was thinking, you know, in God's time, you know, 400 years is nothing. You know, after all, well, one day takes 1,000 years, you know. So what God is forecasting as far as time is concerned seems, you know, quite reasonable. You know, we'll do it tomorrow or a couple of weeks from now, you know, it may be 400 years, but, you know, that's 400 years. You know? So you got to think like that. Don't demand immediate gratification because it's not coming.
Interesting. Any other thoughts on this? I just know for me, I trust people more when you're willing to tell me the hard things because it feels realistic. Kind of, Helen, like what you were saying, like life has good things and life has bad things. So if someone's only telling me the good things, I'm inherently suspicious.
Yeah.
So almost like saying like there's a catch almost feels like, okay, I knew the other shoe was gonna drop sometime. Thank you for like, okay, I know I would be more on board because you told me what the other side of this was. It's not just all sunshine and rainbows, but there are the storm clouds. Although it is interesting that in this promise, none of the hardships will hit Abram. God even says this, that you're gonna live to a ripe old age, you're gonna be buried with your ancestors, and all's gonna be hunky-dory for you. It's just your kids after you are gonna get a hard lesson.
And of the kids that he's going to get. So it's almost like, be careful what you wish for.
Right. And so if you haven't caught on yet, this is directly a kind of Exodus foreshadowing. 100%, this is talking about them going to Egypt, as we've kind of already seen a shadow of with Abram going to Egypt and coming out wealthy. Now we have the kind of looking forward to say, okay, you're going to have a lot of descendants. They're going to go to a place, wink, wink, it's Egypt, and they're going to be slaves, and it's going to be hard, but then they're going to come out and they're going to be wealthy, kind of like you did, wink, wink, right? So this is the second foreshadowing we get here. And we do have this kind of interesting last line that the Amorites are not done doing the bad things that they're going to be doing. So kind of almost, they're bad, but they're going to get worse, and then I'm going to punish them, kind of a thing. Like we need them to finish up figuring out what's going on there. The Amorites are one of those, just, they show up again and again and again. They are one of the classic enemies of Israel. It's kind of stand-in script, your neighborhood bully. They've just always been kind of at the Amorites. So it's like, oh, we need them to get a little bit worse before I want you to fight them. Because I need an excuse for you to kill them, basically, for better or for worse. All right, so that's our dream sequence. Any other thoughts about the dream sequence here? All right, so when the sun had actually gone down and it was dark.
Yes, Chris, I have a question.
What's up?
On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, my understanding of a covenant is that both parties are making promises. To make a covenant, it's two-sided. And I don't see Abram's side in this. I just see what God is giving to Abram. I don't see this as a covenant.
So let's talk about that word. Because what goes directly above that actually has everything to do with that word. So we have the smoking fire pot. And, oh, this is where you get the image, a flaming torch passed between the pieces of the animals. So there has to be at least somewhat of a gap between the cut pieces, because we're not given a corporeal shape, but there somehow is like a floating torch, at least, that's passing between these two pieces of the animals. There is part of the word covenant in kind of the root here that means to cut. So literally the cut animals is part of what it means, where we can get into it because covenant gets is used in a few different contexts, but yes, it's a signing of the contract. We've seen kind of God and Abram promise different things in other places, but they're not called covenants then. They're called covenants here, literally because the animals have been cut, and the word cut is in covenant.
Yeah,
A little bit weird, right?
yeah, I'm not convinced.
So part of this is the fact that so going down this line a little bit further, Abram does not have a bank account. He has gold, but there isn't that same kind of currency system as we have developed today. Our wealth is often in the bank, it's invested in stocks and bonds. When we draw it out, we have paper money and coins. Most of Abram's wealth is animals. And so to have this ceremony where you cut them in half and you have the flame passing back and forth, literally, it kind of is Abram making a deposit, because he's killing these big animals. I mean, a heifer, like that is a big animal that he just chopped apart, and it's lying in a field. He's not gonna cook it afterwards because it's no longer clean. He's not able to bleed it at this point. It's not going to be used for food. So all of these animals are basically Abram's wealth, and he's cutting it apart, and he's not going to be able to do anything else, especially because after he cut them apart, he laid them out, and then he fell asleep. And so there's this cook pot, a smoking fire pot, but it's not with cooking the animals necessarily. So we have this wealth investment of it being cut apart, presented, and the flame is kind of sanctifying, almost like a cash investment in God. Does that change it a little bit more? If you understand that that's his wealth laying there, and it's gonna spoil.
I just looked up covenant in the dictionary, and it says an agreement, usually formal, between two or more persons to do or not do something specified. And so if Abram sacrificing these animals and birds is his way of making his promise of devotion, obedience, whatever, to God, that, and I'm just thinking out loud here, that could be his side of covenant, that he is giving his obedience and whatever else words you want to put in there, God in turn is giving the descendants the land, the river of Egypt, yada yada yada. So throw that in there for consideration.
Yeah. This may just be a symbolic representation of Abram's acceptance of the covenant with the Lord. He sacrificed these to the Lord. He has this dream where the flames and so forth, which must have some sort of significance as far as as what the conversations that they have had. And that's, another biblical way of describing something simple in a very obtuse way.
Right. Yeah. So some of the other people that we've seen kind of communicate with God. So we have Adam and Eve is in this Yahweh tradition where they know God walking in the garden. So evidently they've seen more of a corporeal shape of God. In Noah, we have kind of this, I'm going to send a flood, and then the flood comes. So there's this like visual confirmation. So there is this element of making things visual, that we do have some kind of visualization and something other than God just talking to Abram. We have this kind of visual confirmation. And yeah, I hear you, Mary Ellen, that like Abram needs some part of this because he's agreed to things in the past in his side of it, but like here in this setting, is it just monetary? So here we go. I'm going to switch screens over because I found some of the words that we're dealing with. All right. So here's once again the website that I use to help with language or some of the Hebrew language on the fly. So this is the word for covenant, berith, which is where you this little word right here. And so this word alone very much does mean covenant, where you have all of this is like treaty, an alliance, a league. So you can have it between men. But when you go down here, you see some of the more, where did it go? Some of the exhaustive things. So it's also the term used for confederacy. Here is where what I was saying before comes in. Barah and Barah. Evidently, this is seen not just here, but a compact because of made between passing between pieces of flesh. And a covenant and a league. But when you jump over to some of these other root words that they think are connected, you have this one, which is to shape or to create. So you're like creating something when you're creating a covenant. But we have something because it is connected to, hold on, my toolbar needs to move in a moment. Come on, stop doing that. We have this other one, which literally means to eat. So all of these things, remember in the Hebrew mindset, puns are really important, connecting words together. All of these words kind of have like this similar root, or they actually did come from the same source and just like evolved different ones. This is you have to eat and to choose. And so you're like, there's this element of choosing and eating. So you have this shaping and creating, to form, to fashion, to cut. And so this is where we have like kind of the notion that to make a covenant has a kind of cutting involved with it, to found and to build, to incise, to fashion. So all of these words are kind of create, or like to eat, to cut, to form, to shape, to eat. All of that is kind of involved in this word to covenant. So, there we go. Now you're all back. Yeah. So in some ways, it seems weird to us because we just don't think this way. And like when we talk about puns, we use puns as jokes. Where here, pun is kind of like, it has all of this word association. So 100% a covenant is an agreement between two people that like, they're each doing something. Right. But they are definitely using a visual pun here because in a sense, God is almost having this thing of like, you are cutting these things apart to show that we're making this covenant. But you're not just cutting anything apart, you're cutting food apart, which is also involved in this word. Am I frozen? There we go. I'm like freezing up on my side. So you have all of this like dynamics of all the history of this one word that they would know. Because remember, they like to use words in many different ways where we like to create new words to mean different things. So that's just a difference in how language works. So to prove that all of their agreement making is a done deal, we're having this cutting ceremony. We're doing this visual passing back and forth to kind of have a visualization for God. And it's kind of this weird thing, but it makes sense to them. They're kind of like, okay, cool, sounds good. We're signed up. God kind of like signified that my cutting apart is good, and my end of the bargain, it does have financial aspects, but I'm also gonna do what God says, and God's gonna evidently give me an heir. So this is signing of the contract, because Abram's probably not able to read. So how do you sign a contract if you don't really have access to writing utensils and you can't really read? I guess you cut a bunch of animals apart and you walk between them.
Okay.
Good.
So does that make that situation
Okay.
any more clear?
Yeah, it's just, God told him what he wanted Abram to do and what animals he wanted provided. And I find that part interesting, but, Abram then agreed and did provide the animals. And when I think about the 3-year-old heifer and the 3-year-old whatever, I'm not looking at the page right now. Those are all animals in their prime. They're the very best. And this is making more sense to me that God told him what he wanted Abram's part of the covenant to be, and Abram complied. And in compromise, that's frequently what happens, is you tell the other person what you want them to agree to. If you do this, then I'll do that, kind of a thing. So,
Yeah. All right. But with that, we're at time. All right. Like I said, today was going to be all about covenants, because covenants it took some explaining to understand what exactly is going on here. So, for next week, we have
16.
Definitely 16.
Yeah.
Let's do 16 and the first half of 7. Let's go ahead and read 16 and 17, and we might just talk about Ishmael. And if we have time, we're going to come back to covenant, because we're going to have this interlude of Abram trying to make it work, and then we're going to get clarification of what exactly this covenant was about. All right. So read them together. It will at least give context. We may just discuss 16 though.
Okay.
Sound good?
Okay.
All right. Let us pray us out real quick.
Mhm.
Good and gracious God, kind of like Abram, you have promised us things as well. We hold on to promises of love and forgiveness, that you are present with us, and you said you would be with us to the end of the age, and we hold on to those things. And our side of the covenant is often been for us to trust you, us to step out in faith, and to follow the movement of your Spirit. So I ask that you bless this group, and you help them follow that Spirit, and help us and empower us to hold up our end of the covenant, so that we can be in relationship and hopefully be with you until the end of our days and even afterwards. So we thank you that we are the chosen of your covenant, as are all people of all times and all places. And so bless us and keep us until we come back together again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
amen.
All right. You all have a lovely day, and I hope you don't get stuck in the heat outside.
A lovely day.
Okay.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.